Now, last week, a report came out about the Flint water crisis, in which tens of thousands of residents were exposed to lead-contaminated drinking water, and that the administration, the Snyder administration here in Michigan, had attempted to cover up. Now, this report was released by Republican Governor Rick Snyder's Civil Rights Commission, argues that systemic racism had played a major role in this crisis. Now, is according to an article posted in Detroit Free Press. The 135-page report delves into the history of race and racism in the Flint area and argues that historical practices like redlining, or only renting and selling property to black residents in certain areas of the city, white flight to the suburbs, intergenerational poverty, and implicit bias, something that I talk about a lot, all helped lay the groundwork for an economic situation in the city in which an emergency manager was needed in the first place. So we're not talking about just what happened after the emergency manager. No, we're going back in the history and really painting. They go and paint the picture of why and how racism had affected the economy of Flint for decades on end to lead up to the current crisis. So that's a very interesting approach. Now, why they had to point this out is because the emergency manager was responsible for the decision to switch to the Flint River in the first place. They did so as a so-called cost-cutting move back in 2014. Of course, further reports say that it actually didn't cost that much less to be able to switch over to the Flint River. Now, that decision, of course, allowed the very highly corrosive Flint water to essentially leach lead from the city's old pipes into the drinking water. So the pipes, of course, hadn't been replaced. They were still old lead pipes. They had there's usually a layer there that protects and doesn't allow the water to leach that lead. Well, when you have corrosive water going through the pipes, it takes off that protective layer, and then it leaches all the lead that it can, and it goes right into the drinking water. Now, at the same time, state officials had failed to require corrosion control chemicals added to the water. Now, this is something that was already required by federal law. Hey, if you're going to use a corrosive water source, we're going to make you add something to the water that so that you don't leach lead into your drinking water from the pipes, so that people will not be drinking poison water. Well, that's a nice regulation. I'm glad it happened, but they didn't use it. Now, why didn't they do it? Well, that's kind of a good question, because in other places that is supposed to be a standard practice. Now, what made Flint so different from some of these other places? Oh, right. It's majority black. And that goes, of course, to the systemic racism. Systemic racism, of course, played a large part in the sluggish response to the crisis, and officials' attempts to delegitimize Flint residents' concern that problems with the water supply existed long before Snyder's administration acknowledged an issue, according to the report. Now, look, I remember covering a story somewhere last year, maybe even before that, where Flint residents were told by officials at town halls and meetings that they were lying about their water being contaminated. No, this water is perfectly safe to drink, not contaminated whatsoever. You know what you were doing? You were stirring up trouble. You are lying. Well, remember, these people, they're like, man, something is weird with our water. It smells funny. It looks funny. We're getting rashes. We're getting burns. Things are, we're having a lot of health issues related to this water. Let's get it tested. Let's go to the city first. Ask them to test it. Well, there's nothing wrong with the water. There's nothing wrong with the water. So then they go to independent testers that found huge levels of lead into the water. And when they go back to those officials from the city to say, hey, we got this independently tested. It's full of lead. Do something about it. The officials would just be like, you're lying. You're lying. It's not true. It's not true. This water is 100% safe to drink. Oh, yeah? If it's so safe, why don't you fucking drink it? I'm not thirsty. That's what happened. Okay, that's the cover-up part of this whole thing. Now, the commission believes in this report that we have answered our initial question. Was race a factor in Flint water crisis? Our answer is an unreserved and undeniable yes, according to the report. Holy crap. Now, further says, the people of Flint have been subjected to unprecedented harm and hardship, much of it caused by structural and systemic discrimination and racism that have corroded your city, your institutions, and your water pipes for generations. When the last of the civil lawsuits and attorney general criminal investigations are completed and relief dollars from state and federal sources are exhausted, what will remain is a city and its people who will continue to fight against built-in barriers, but whose voices, as a matter of public right, must never be stifled or quelled again. Wow. Holy hell, man. There's nothing in that report that is incorrect. Now, the report's authors were people appointed by Governor Snyder. So you can't say that these were all the liberals. It's the little liberal report. Racism doesn't exist. No, these are Snyder guys. Okay? He picked these people. And furthermore, they say that the people of Flint did not enjoy equal protection of environment or public health laws, and that they have not had a meaningful voice in the decisions leading up to the Flint water crisis itself. In fact, the report says many argue that they had no voice because people did not listen to them. The officials ignored them and would denigrate them, ruin their reputations. That's what happened in Flint, and so much more. I mean, look, this report, I think, from what I've read of it anyway, barely scratches the surface of what's going on. The Flint water crisis is ironically, Herman Cain, it's like 2 layers deep. So, look, the report also claims that current state civil rights laws appear inadequate to address the deeply embedded institutional, systemic, and historical racism that we find at the root of this crisis. So, the question is, how do we fix it? Well, the report offers a litany of potential policy changes, including to the state's emergency manager law, and implies the emergency manager law is focused on cutting costs at the expense of people's well-being. Exactly. That was kind of the point, to put cutting costs over people. That's why the people of Michigan, myself included, voted to eliminate and overturn this law. And you know what happened? It was up for referendum, and we overturned the law. But then Snyder came in, put it back up, and made it so that the people in Michigan could not overturn it again. So they usurped democracy to put back a law that usurps democracy. The people of Michigan said, we don't want this law. We think it's undemocratic. We think it will lead to many more issues than it purports to solve. And that it is unequal, it is applied unequally to cities that are minority controlled, that are mostly minority. And that's exactly what they've been using it for, to go after cities that are majority African American. That's why it's racist. But anyway, the report said that the emergency manager law should be amended to offer local representation alongside that manager with the ability to appeal an adverse decision, and that locally elected government should still play a role in the emergency manager's decisions, among other recommended changes to the law. But if it were up to me, I would eliminate this law because of what it does. It overturns democracy. You end up having way more problems with this law than without it. And sure, cities will run into fiscal issues. I mean, it's not like Michigan has been growing all that much when it comes to the economy. Look, when the car industry, the automobile industry, basically tanked over the last decade, Michigan has not pulled itself out. It's still bad here. Maybe not as bad as some other places, like, for example, Pennsylvania or places like Appalachia. But it's not great here either. The auto industry, leaving, outsourcing, stuff like that, has had a terrible, detrimental effect on the Michigan economy. Now, Commission members have also recommended the governor's office invite experts on implicit bias to train the cabinet and all state departments, including the Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Environmental Quality. Now, I like that idea. I think people do need to know about implicit bias. And when we talk about that, when you talk about racism, there are two types of people who are racist, right? There is the Klan wearing, the Klan hood wearing racists who are openly racist. And then there are people that have implicit bias. These people aren't necessarily racist. They don't necessarily know that they're doing anything wrong, but they have certain biases from certain stereotypes. It's not fair to call them racist also, because they have this bias and they don't necessarily know any better. So when you actually tell them about this, when you actually show them that they do have implicit bias, when they realize they have this bias, they go, oh shit, you're right, I never thought differently than that. This is what I heard growing up. This is what I heard from this. This is what I heard from Fox News. Or this is what I heard from the news or from my friends. I never realized that what this was actual racism. Oh man, I'm going to stop doing that. And look, we all have implicit bias. It's not a bad thing necessarily to have, as long as you realize that you have it and you start to actually make a change in that. And so I think it's great when you talk about implicit bias. And it's not even something that is always, and again, it doesn't make you a bad person to have this implicit bias, right? It could be something as, feeling a little bit fearful when you see a black person on an elevator, or when you're riding with a black person on the elevator. You see some women clutch their purses a little tighter. Doesn't make her a Klan wearing, a hood wearing racist. But there's that implicit bias. And it gets factored into things like employment. You see somebody with a black sounding name, and they've done studies on this as well, where somebody with a black sounding name sends in a resume, the exact same resume of somebody with a white sounding name. That white sounding name gets a callback. The black sounding name does not. That's bias. That is an inherent bias. And it's also institutional racism as well, based on old stereotypes. That's the stuff that you need to address. That's the stuff that you need to talk about. And it's the stuff that needs to get fixed. So again, I love the idea of them bringing in people that are experts on explaining implicit bias to other people so that we can actually solve this problem and we can actually promote more equality. Now, as far as these recommendations, there's some I would go a little step further. I'd start throwing people in jail. Starting with the emergency managers all the way up to the governor. Anybody that has a hand in this, knowingly, that helped cover up these crimes, gone. You can't just get away with poisoning an entire fucking city to try and save a few bucks. It's grotesque. It's grotesque. And then to try to cover it up by blaming the EPA, by blaming bureaucracy. No. You don't get to get away with that. No. Bureaucracy? What bureaucracy? That was one of Governor Snyder's excuses. Oh, no, it's bureaucracy's fault that this happened. The emergency manager had sole control of the city. That's what the emergency manager does. You put him there. The buck stops with you, dude. He used that power that you gave him, and people ended up getting poisoned. No. You throw the book at them. You throw the bookshelf. Hell, I'd throw the fucking library at them. It's gross. It's racist. And it's negligent. And it's going to have impacts on the rest of these people's lives. You do not recover from lead poisoning. That damage stays with you forever. Now, look, it's not a surprise for me to see that racism played a huge role in this crisis, whether or not it's implicit bias or not. When you stop caring about your fellow man, when it comes to because of the color of their skin and because of ridiculous stereotypes you might have heard, it ends up having the effect of dehumanizing people. When you dehumanize someone, a population, It allows you to be able to put your own profit over the well-being of people that you're supposed to be helping. And that, my friends, is not a good thing. It's something that we need to fix. And something that I think right now, what happened in Flint deserves more than bringing in a couple of experts to talk about bias. I think there needs to be jail time involved. You shouldn't get away with poisoning a city. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.